Canada is a country of superlatives and surprises. The second largest nation on Earth, spanning from the Atlantic to the Pacific and up into the Arctic. Its territory covers nearly 10 million square kilometers of mountains, forests, prairies, and tundra. Yet only around 38 million people call it home. A population about on par with the Tokyo metropolitan area, spread across a landmass larger than all of Europe. This immense scale gives Canada the world's longest coastline, over 243,000 kilometers of shores tracing 3 oceans, and the longest international border, an almost 8,900 kilometers peaceful frontier shared with the United States. Culturally, Canada is just as expansive, a mosaic of Indigenous heritage, French and British roots, and generations of immigrants from every corner of the globe. It's a G7 economy and a global symbol of multiculturalism and wilderness, a country perpetually balancing its vast natural riches with its identity as a modern, inclusive society. In this journey, we will explore Canada's landscapes and cultures through untold stories that illuminate how place and people are deeply intertwined. Canada's varied geography is a story of extremes. It stretches across 6 time zones, from Newfoundland, where the clock is set oddly half an hour ahead, all the way to British Columbia on the Pacific coast. To put its breadth in perspective, a drive from St. John's, Newfoundland to Vancouver, British Columbia, covers over 7,000 kilometers, roughly the distance from London to Shanghai. In winter, parts of Canada regularly plunge into life-threatening cold. The Yukon's Snag Valley holds the North American record at minus 63 degrees Celsius, cold enough that voices reportedly carried for kilometers in the dense Arctic air. Yet in the summer, the opposite extreme scorches the land. Prairie towns have seen temperatures approach 40 to 45 degrees Celsius under heat waves. And in one recent event, British Columbia briefly hit an astonishing 49.6 degrees Celsius, rivaling the hottest deserts. From permafrost and ice roads in the far north to the temperate rainforests and even small pockets of desert-like sand dunes in the west, Canada contains multitudes of climates. It's a land where you can experience blizzards and heat waves, midnight sun and midwinter darkness, all within the same country. These physical extremes have profoundly shaped the Canadian psyche and way of life. The sheer vastness of the land, open and untamed, fostered a spirit of resilience and self-reliance in those who inhabit it. Small communities often lie hours or even days apart by car, so Canadians are accustomed to distance and isolation in a way few other nations understand. In some northern hamlets, neighbors might be connected more by bush plane routes than by roads, forging tight bonds born of necessity and cooperation against a harsh environment. At the same time, the abundance of space has cultivated a deep respect for nature. Canada's identity is tied to images of wilderness, endless forests, pristine lakes, and big skies. The very nickname Great White North hints not only at snowy expanses, but at a collective awe for the grand, untamed character of the land. Living in such a place has instilled values of humility and adaptability. After all, when winter storms can blanket entire provinces, even modern cities pause and yield to nature. Globally, Canada's extreme geography sets it apart as a country of both challenges and wonders, from its record-breaking coastlines to the northern lights that dance over its Arctic skies. The Canadian experience is fundamentally shaped by the land's vast scale and contrasts, teaching lessons about endurance and unity that resonate far beyond its borders. Long before Canada was a country, its landscapes carried the stories of Indigenous peoples stretching back over 10,000 years. Every mountain, river, and valley had a name and a meaning in one of the dozens of First Nations, Inuit, or Métis languages. According to Haida legend, for example, the first humans emerged on Haida Gwaii when Raven, the trickster creator, discovered a giant clamshell on the beach and coaxed curious little creatures out of it. Those beings became the Haida people, and their descendants still honor that origin story on the same misty islands off Canada's west coast. On the plains, the Blackfoot and other nations perfected a unique way to live off the land's bounty. For millennia, they hunted bison by driving herds over cliffs in sites like Head-Smashed-In Buffalo Jump, a sandstone precipice in Alberta. This World Heritage Site holds layers of bones and history, showing continuous use for nearly 6,000 years. evidence of sophisticated communal hunting techniques and spiritual practices tied intimately to the landscape. From the Mi'kmaq of the eastern woodlands to the Dene of the subarctic, indigenous cultures developed in harmony with vastly different environments, creating a rich tapestry of traditions across what is now Canada. The depth and diversity of Indigenous heritage remains central to Canada's story today. There are over 630 First Nations communities in Canada, representing more than 50 distinct nations and at least 50 Indigenous languages. Each carries wisdom and narratives tied to specific places: sacred lakes, revered animals, ancestral routes of migration and trade. The Inuit in the Arctic, for instance, have over a dozen words for different types of snow and ice, a linguistic reflection of a nuanced understanding of their environment honed over thousands of years. Such knowledge is invaluable in an era of climate change now transforming the far north. Meanwhile, after centuries of upheaval due to colonization, Indigenous peoples are revitalizing their cultures and asserting their rights. Initiatives to preserve and teach languages like Cree and Inuktitut are growing, and Inuit self-government was realized in 1999 with the creation of Nunavut, a vast territory governed by its predominantly Inuit population. These efforts echo a broader truth. The landscapes of Canada are not empty wilderness, but homelands. Many modern Canadians are learning that the untold stories of places, from creation myths to historical injustices, must be acknowledged to truly understand the land. Through reconciliation movements and cultural resurgence, the First Peoples are sharing age-old perspectives that see humans as part of the natural world, not separate from it. This outlook, forged by living in partnership with the environment, offers lessons in stewardship that resonate globally as we all grapple with how to live sustainably on our planet. The Canada we know today was stitched together through bold acts of vision and backbreaking labor across a forbidding landscape. In the 19th century, as the British and French colonies in North America evolved, there was a grand idea to unite these far-flung territories from sea to sea. But talk alone could not bridge the thousands of kilometers of wilderness separating the Atlantic from the Pacific. The solution came in the form of steel rails. The building of the Canadian Pacific Railway, CPR, in the 1880s remains one of the most legendary feats of engineering and perseverance in history. Crews of workers, including thousands of Chinese laborers whose contributions were long underappreciated, blasted and tunneled through the granite walls of the Canadian Shield and laid track over the towering Rocky Mountains. In 1885, at a place called Craigellachie in the mountains of British Columbia, the last spike was driven into the CPR. This single moment physically linked East and West for the first time, making good on the promise that had enticed colonies like British Columbia to join the new Confederation of Canada. The railway allowed people and goods to move across the continent in days instead of months, shrinking the map and knitting together a nation out of regions as different as the fishing outports of Newfoundland and the gold rush camps of the Yukon. With the iron rails came profound changes to the land and its people. The railway enabled waves of settlers to pour into the prairies, where vast grasslands were transformed into farms that would become Canada's breadbasket. By the early 20th century, wheat from Saskatchewan and Alberta was feeding not only Canadians but millions overseas, establishing Canada as one of the world's great grain exporters, a role it still plays, often ranking in the top few global wheat suppliers. The railroad also had a hand in shaping Canada's cultural geography. To encourage travel on the new transcontinental line, the CPR built grand railway hotels at strategic stops, many of which became landmarks in their own right. Chateau Frontenac, opened in 1893 atop the old city walls of Quebec City, is one famous example. A fairy tale castle-like hotel that claims to be the most photographed hotel in the world. Further west, the company constructed the Banff Springs Hotel amid the alpine splendor of the Rockies, turning remote wilderness into a destination for well-heeled tourists. These elegant hotels, with their turrets and grand dining halls, became symbols of a young nation eager to project both its rich natural scenery and its ability to host the world in style. Behind the scenes, however, the forging of Canada was not without cost. Indigenous peoples were displaced from lands, and the bison herds on which they depended were nearly wiped out by overhunting and habitat loss. By the 1880s, The prairie's once 30 million strong bison population had been reduced to a few hundred individuals, fundamentally disrupting indigenous ways of life. In recent years, Canada has started to address some of these historical wrongs. For instance, reintroducing bison to Banff National Park after their absence for over a century. The forging of the nation, then, is an ongoing story. One of connecting distant coasts and peoples, but also of coming to terms with how that nation-building impacted the first inhabitants. It's a complex legacy that underpins modern Canada's commitment to both celebrate its unity and acknowledge its diversity and history. One of Canada's greatest gifts to the world is its vast system of protected wild places, living museums of the planet's natural heritage. In fact, the idea of a national park found early expression here. Banff National Park, established in 1885 in the Rocky Mountains, was Canada's first and the world's third national park. It set the template for preserving spectacular landscapes for public benefit. Today, Canada boasts 48 national parks and reserves, from tiny suburban Rouge National Urban Park in Toronto's outskirts to the sprawling Nahanni National Park Reserve in the Northwest Territories. Each park is a world of its own. In Banff, turquoise glacial lakes like Lake Louise mirror snow-capped peaks, a scene so magical that it draws visitors from every continent to witness it in person. Out east, Gros Morne National Park in Newfoundland protects rugged cliffs and strange tabletop mountains of exposed ancient mantle rock, offering a rare glimpse into Earth's geological past. In the far north, Auyutuk National Park, the land that never melts, in Inuktitut, on Baffin Island, features fjords and ice caps that seem ripped from the last ice age, with sheer granite towers rising above glaciers. These places are more than postcard vistas. They are refuges for wildlife and reservoirs of ecological diversity. Migratory birds, caribou herds, grizzly bears, rare orchids, all find sanctuary in Canada's parks. Here, nature is allowed to weave its ancient patterns with minimal human interference, creating havens of biodiversity that are increasingly precious in our developed world. Perhaps the most iconic of Canada's natural wonders is Niagara Falls, a thundering reminder of nature's raw power and majesty. Straddling the border between Ontario and New York State, Niagara is actually a set of 3 waterfalls, the largest of which, Horseshoe Falls, lies mostly on the Canadian side. The sight is mesmerizing. Water from 4 of the Great Lakes funnels into the Niagara River and hurtles over a 51-meter drop in a frothing curtain of white. During peak flow in summer, more than 2,800 cubic meters of water cascade over the falls every second, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool in under a second, and indeed the most voluminous waterfall in North America. The deafening roar and perpetual mist have inspired visitors for centuries. Native peoples long held the falls as sacred, and since the 19th century, honeymooners and daredevils alike have been drawn to its brink. Yet Niagara is but one highlight among countless natural marvels. Canada's wild places also hold subtle wonders. The eerie, hoodoo rock formations in Alberta's Badlands, the shimmering multicolored autumn forests of Quebec and Ontario, the silence of a Saskatchewan night broken only by coyote howls under a sky full of stars. Many of these landscapes remain relatively untouched thanks to Canada's strong conservation ethic. Over 12% of the country's land is protected as parks or reserves, and the percentage is steadily growing. This commitment recognizes that preserving nature isn't just about scenery. It's about safeguarding watersheds, storing carbon in vast boreal forests, and honoring the deep cultural connections that Indigenous and local communities have to the land. Globally, Canada's parks are part of humanity's natural endowment. By keeping these nature's masterpieces intact and accessible, Canada provides inspiration and knowledge to the world about how wild ecosystems function and why they matter. Each park and wild place is a living storybook, teaching us about geological time, adaptation, and the intricate interdependence of life. Truly untold stories written in wind, stone, and water for those who take the time to read them. Water is the lifeblood of Canada, a defining element of its geography and a key to its historical development. The country contains an astonishing quantity of the world's fresh water. More than 2 million lakes dot the landscape, more than any other country. And in total, Canada holds around 20% of the world's freshwater resources when counting water in its lakes, underground aquifers, and glaciers. Even when considering renewable flow, water replenished by rain and runoff each year, Canada still has about 7% of the world's supply, an immense endowment that has earned it the nickname the water-rich nation. The Great Lakes on the Canada-US border form the largest group of freshwater lakes on Earth, a chain so vast it behaves like a connected inland sea. Lake Superior alone could hold all the water of Lakes Erie, Ontario, and 4 Lake Michigans with room to spare. These lakes and their connecting rivers, notably the St. Lawrence River, have been crucial in Canada's story. Indigenous peoples used the St. Lawrence and Great Lakes as trade routes for thousands of years, and French explorer Samuel de Champlain traveled them in the 1600s, establishing New France along their shores. Later, canals and locks like the Rideau Canal and the Welland Canal were built, allowing ships to bypass rapids and Niagara Falls. Feats of engineering that turned the Great Lakes Basin into a major artery of commerce. By 1959, the St. Lawrence Seaway was completed as a binational project, enabling ocean-going vessels to sail all the way from the Atlantic into the heart of North America, reaching ports in Montreal, Toronto, and even Duluth, Minnesota. This water highway cemented Canada's role in global trade and bound its economy tightly to the rhythms of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence. But beyond commerce, Canada's waterways have also shaped its culture and daily life in myriad ways. The country's very map is defined by sinuous rivers that were once the only pathways through the wilderness. Fur trade voyageurs in the 18th century paddled giant birch bark canoes up the Ottawa River and across the height of land to Lake Superior, then westward on the Saskatchewan River, a monumental journey of endurance, repeated year after year to collect beaver pelts. These routes, plied by hardy French-Canadian voyageurs singing songs to keep time, were the arteries that nourished early Canada's economy. In the Atlantic provinces and British Columbia, fishing villages grew up where rivers met the sea, and entire cultures were built around the seasonal pulse of salmon runs or the tidal rhythms of shellfish harvests. The maritime people of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, for example, depended heavily on the cod fisheries of the Grand Banks just offshore, an incredibly rich resource famously described by explorer John Cabot in 1497. Cabot reported seas swarming with fish that can be taken not only with nets but in baskets, and for centuries, salted Newfoundland cod fed markets from Boston to Lisbon. That fishery's dramatic collapse in the 1990s due to overfishing stands as a cautionary tale of humanity's ability to exhaust even seemingly limitless natural wealth. Today, Canada works to balance use and protection of its waters. Hydroelectric dams on rivers like the Churchill, Columbia, and Nelson provide about 60% of Canada's electricity, marking Canada as one of the world's largest hydropower producers. Yet, those same projects require careful management to minimize disruption to aquatic ecosystems and indigenous fishing grounds. Meanwhile, iconic waterborne spectacles like the Bay of Fundy's tides, the highest in the world, rising a staggering 15 meters in places, remain unmarred. Twice daily in Fundy, the ocean literally reverses rivers' flow upstream, a natural marvel that underscores the dynamic relationship between land and sea. Whether it's paddling a canoe on a mirror-still lake at dawn, skating on Ottawa's Rideau Canal, the world's longest frozen skating trail at 7.8 kilometers, in winter, or marveling at the thunder of Niagara Falls, water continues to shape Canadian recreation and identity. The untold story of Canada's Blue Highways is ultimately one of connection. Waterways linked distant communities long before roads, and today they connect Canada to the world, both physically and through shared concerns of water conservation in a changing climate. At Canada's northern edge lies a world that few people ever see firsthand, yet it looms large in the nation's identity and in the planet's future. The Canadian Arctic, encompassing the northern mainland and a vast archipelago of polar islands, is a region of extreme conditions and delicate beauty. Here, for much of the year, the ocean remains frozen over and the sun either barely rises or barely sets, depending on the season. Yet life not only endures here, it thrives in ingenious ways. The Inuit, who have called the Arctic home for millennia, developed a culture exquisitely tuned to this environment. They fashioned warm shelter from snow. The iconic igloo is a marvel of insulation. Clothing from caribou and seal skin, and a diet rich in fish and marine mammals that provided necessary fats and vitamins in a land with no farms. Their knowledge of sea ice, distinguishing its subtle colors and sounds, has traditionally guided them in traveling and hunting safely across frozen bays and flows. Today, Inuit communities from Inuvik to Iqaluit maintain many of these traditions even as modern technology and climate shifts bring rapid change. In 1999, Inuit leadership achieved a historic milestone with the creation of Nunavut, Canada's newest territory, granting a measure of self-governance over a region larger than Mexico. This was more than a political event. It was the affirmation of a people's enduring presence in the Arctic and a commitment to blending traditional wisdom with contemporary governance. Indigenous place names have been restored on the map. For instance, Canada's highest peak, once known only by its English name Mount Logan, 5,959 meters high in the Yukon, is within Banff National Park, and nearby mountains now carry names in the Southern Tuchone language. These are steps toward recognizing that the Arctic is not an empty ice desert, but a homeland rich with stories and meaning. The Arctic is also where the impact of global forces is starkly evident. As the climate warms, the far north is heating up at least twice the global average rate, causing permafrost to thaw and sea ice to retreat farther each summer. Ancient ice routes, like the legendary Northwest Passage, the once elusive sea corridor through the Arctic archipelago, are now sometimes navigable by ships in late summer due to diminished ice. This has opened new possibilities for shipping and resource extraction, but also raises serious concerns for the fragile Arctic ecosystem and for the Inuit who rely on stable ice for travel and hunting. Iconic Arctic animals are likewise under pressure. The polar bear, which the Inuit know as Nanook, is facing habitat loss as sea ice, their hunting platform for seals, shrinks. Canada is home to approximately 16,000 polar bears, about two-thirds of the world's remaining population, making it the steward of this magnificent creature's future. In Churchill, Manitoba, known as the polar bear capital of the world, visitors can witness bears wandering the shores of Hudson Bay each fall, waiting for the sea to refreeze. It's a breathtaking spectacle that also underscores a sobering truth. As sea ice forms later each year, the bears must wait longer, fasting and sometimes wandering into town. Canada has responded by creating vast protected areas in the Arctic, like the new Talarutiup-Imanga, Lancaster Sound, Marine Conservation Area, and by supporting international agreements to combat climate change and control Arctic shipping. The Arctic's untold stories range from the tragic, such as the fate of the Franklin expedition, whose ships vanished in the ice in 1846 and were only discovered in recent years, to the inspiring, like the resilience of Inuit art and culture that continues to flourish. Soapstone carvings of Arctic animals, throat singing that echoes the howl of the wind. Ultimately, the Canadian Arctic is a place where myth and reality meet. A land of midnight sun and aurora-lit nights that has always challenged humanity to adapt and respect its power. As the world's canary in the coal mine for climate change, what happens in the Arctic will reverberate far beyond, reminding us that all nations share responsibility for this frontier at the top of the world. If Canada's land is vast and varied, so too are its people. Unlike the melting pot metaphor of some other countries, Canada proudly aspires to be a cultural mosaic, where each community retains its distinct color while contributing to the larger national picture. This approach has roots in Canada's founding as a bilingual nation, English and French, after the union of British and French colonies. Today, walking down a busy street in Toronto or Vancouver, you'll hear dozens of languages: Cantonese and Punjabi, Arabic and Tagalog, French and Cree, often all on the same city block. In fact, Toronto, Canada's largest city, is often called the City of 140 Languages, a testament to its incredible diversity. Over 23% of Canada's residents are foreign-born as of the latest census, one of the highest proportions in the Western world. These newcomers hail from all over, Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and have transformed Canada's cultural landscape in rich ways. In Toronto, You can celebrate Chinese New Year in bustling Chinatown. Then, a few subway stops away, enjoy Diwali festivities in Little India or savor cannoli in Little Italy. Montreal's vibrant mix includes not only its French Quebecois core, but Haitian Creole rhythms in Little Haiti and the aromas of North African tagines in the Jean Talon market. On the prairies, cities like Winnipeg and Saskatoon have significant indigenous populations alongside descendants of Ukrainian, Filipino, and Somali immigrants. Rather than dissolving into a single identity, these communities maintain traditions that are shared and appreciated by others. One neighborhood's festival becomes a citywide celebration. This tapestry of cultures is not without its challenges, but by and large, Canada's pluralism is a success story that it offers to the world. Official multiculturalism policy, in place since the 1970s, affirms the value of all cultures within a Canadian context. That means a person can be proudly Vietnamese Canadian or Nigerian Canadian or Scottish Canadian. Hyphenated identity is embraced rather than seen as a threat to unity. The result is a dynamic society where multiple perspectives coexist and sometimes blend into something new. Take cuisine as an example. Butter chicken poutine, an Indo-Canadian twist on the classic Quebec dish, or sushi burritos, a fusion of Japanese and North American tastes, exemplify how blending can yield delightful results. On a more profound level, Canada's mosaic ethos has also meant offering refuge to people fleeing war and persecution. Over the decades, Canada quietly welcomed tens of thousands of Vietnamese boat people, Tamil refugees, and most recently Syrian families, integrating them into the fabric of its cities and towns. These humanitarian efforts are often led not just by government, but by local communities and faith groups, reflecting values of compassion. Of course, integration is an ongoing process. Issues of systemic racism and the need for reconciliation with Indigenous peoples remind us that the mosaic isn't without cracks. French-English tensions, too, have marked Canadian history. Quebec even held referendums on independence, narrowly choosing to remain in Canada in 1995. Yet, despite occasional strains, the country's commitment to bilingualism and multiculturalism endures. In Ottawa, federal politicians flip effortlessly between French and English in debates, and many signs across the nation appear in both languages. In the Arctic, stop signs read "stop" and also "tisirars," Inuktitut for stop, reflecting the Inuit language alongside English. Such visibility of multiple languages and cultures in the public sphere is a conscious choice. The untold story behind Canada's diversity is perhaps a lesson that unity can emerge not from uniformity, but from embracing diversity under a shared set of values. In Canada's case, ideals of peace, democracy, and respect for human rights. This ongoing experiment in nationhood provides a hopeful counterpoint in a world often fractured by ethnic and religious divides. Canada's mosaic is far from perfect, but it stands as an evolving model of how people from countless backgrounds can weave a common future without losing the richness of their past. Modern Canada is often depicted as a land of wilderness, but it is also a highly urbanized country. About 80% of Canadians live in cities, many of them world-class metropolises that have grown in the shadow of spectacular natural settings. This juxtaposition of urban and wild is one of Canada's unique characteristics. Consider Vancouver, consistently ranked among the most livable cities on the planet. Nestled between the Coast Mountains and the Pacific Ocean, Vancouver is a place where downtown bankers slip out of work early to go skiing or mountain biking on the nearby slopes, and where kayakers share the waterways of English Bay with freighters bound for Asia. The city's skyline, with its sea of glass condo towers, is backdropped by snowy peaks, a constant reminder that raw nature is just a short drive or even a vigorous bike ride away. Vancouver's Stanley Park, a 400-hectare rainforest oasis bordering downtown, boasts giant red cedar and Douglas fir trees that have stood since before the city's founding. It's not uncommon to see a curious harbor seal pop up near the seawall where joggers run, or bald eagles nesting in the park's quiet corners. This intimate interface between city life and wilderness is mirrored across Canada. In Calgary, Alberta, the gleaming office towers of the energy industry are within view of the Rocky Mountains, and the city prides itself on a river parkway where deer are frequent visitors. In Ottawa, The nation's capital, residents skate on the frozen Rideau Canal downtown each winter, turning the heart of the city into a joyous 7.8-kilometer skating rink, the longest in the world. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, colorful row houses cling to hilly streets, while just beyond the harbor narrows, the North Atlantic crashes against cliffs that teem with seabirds and occasionally passing icebergs. Each city is thus defined partly by its proximity to nature, offering a lifestyle where urban amenities and outdoor adventure are both at one's fingertips. Yet Canada's cities are not just about their scenery. They are vibrant cultural and economic centers that anchor the country in the global community. Toronto, the largest city, is Canada's financial hub and a cultural melting pot that rivals any in the world. Its skyline is dominated by the CN Tower, a 553-meter spire that was the world's tallest freestanding structure when built in 1976. The CN Tower remains an iconic symbol of modern Canada, a human-made mountain marking Toronto's emergence as a global city. On any given night, the tower's lights glow in different colors to celebrate events or causes, visible for tens of kilometers across the flat plain of southern Ontario. Just below, Toronto's streets hum with life. Theaters offering everything from Shakespeare to experimental indie plays, sports arenas where crowds roar for hockey and basketball, and neighborhoods like Kensington Market and Queen West, where art, music, and food cultures intersect dynamically. Montreal, Canada's second city, brings its own flair. It's one of the great centers of French-language culture worldwide. The city blends European charm with North American innovation. You might hear a rising indie band play a loft concert in the trendy Mile End District one evening, then stroll the 18th-century cobblestone streets of Old Montreal the next day, indulging in fresh croissants and locally made cheese. Montreal's skyline is kept intentionally low out of respect for Mount Royal, the forested hill at its core, reflecting how even in urban planning, Canadians often preserve green space and sightlines. Out west, Calgary and Edmonton rise on the prairie, proof that big cities can thrive in what was once frontier. Calgary's annual Stampede Rodeo is a nod to its cowboy and ranching heritage, even as the city's modern economy has grown tech startups and arts festivals alongside the oil industry. And then there's Winnipeg, affectionately dubbed Winterpeg for its frigid winters, which has a burgeoning art scene and the stunning Canadian Museum for Human Rights, the first national museum built outside the capital region. Not to forget the smaller gems, Halifax, with its maritime charms and lively pubs fueled by East Coast music. Quebec City, where the stone walls and cannons of the old fortifications coexist with a vibrant French-Canadian contemporary life. And Victoria, the quaint British Columbia capital known for its gardens and as a gateway to Vancouver Island's wild beaches. The untold story of Canada's cities is how they manage a delicate balance, embracing modernity and diversity while remaining deeply connected to the natural and historical context of their locales. Urban Canadians often see themselves as stewards of not just their city blocks, but the lakes, forests, and plains beyond their city limits. It's not unusual for a major city's residents to collectively rally around protecting a nearby watershed or to spend weekends volunteering in conservation projects. In this way, the edge of wilderness isn't just a geographic description, but a mindset. Canada's urban and wild identities reinforce each other, demonstrating that even as societies advance, they need not sever their ties to nature. This model of city building, green, inclusive, and tuned to its environment, is another Canadian contribution that quietly offers lessons to a rapidly urbanizing world. Beneath Canada's landscapes lie extraordinary natural riches that have fueled its economy and shaped its destiny. The story of Canada's development is in many ways a story of resource extraction. Furs, fish, timber, minerals, oil, and gas. For the First Nations and early European traders, the beaver was brown gold. European demand for beaver pelts to make fashionable felt hats drove the fur trade in the 17th and 18th centuries and spurred exploration across the continent. In fact, the Hudson's Bay Company, one of the world's oldest companies, essentially governed much of Canada as Rupert's Land for 2 centuries, its fortunes tied to the ebb and flow of fur prices. Fast forward to the late 19th century, and the discovery of gold in the Klondike, Yukon Territory, sparked one of history's great stampedes. Thousands of prospectors endured a perilous trek through coastal mountains and subarctic tundra in 1897 to 98, chasing rumors of rivers literally glimmering with gold. The Klondike Gold Rush was short-lived, but put Canada's far northwest on the map, leading to the founding of Dawson City and, indirectly, the establishment of Yukon as a territory. As the 20th century progressed, mining towns sprang up across the Canadian Shield. Sudbury for nickel, Flin Flon for copper and zinc, Thompson for nickel again, extracting the ancient minerals of that 4-billion-year-old rock foundation. Sudbury's nickel, for instance, was vital to Allied tank armor in World War II, and the city today boasts a 9-meter big nickel monument to its mining heritage. Canada is now one of the world's top producers of many critical minerals, from potash, used in fertilizer, to uranium, powering nuclear plants. In northern Saskatchewan, uranium mines have supplied fuel for nuclear reactors worldwide, giving Canada a key role in the global energy chain beyond fossil fuels. Of all Canada's resources, however, none has generated as much wealth or controversy as the petroleum locked in Alberta's oil sands. These oil sands, sometimes called tar sands, are essentially vast deposits of bitumen-rich sand and clay, mostly in northern Alberta beneath boreal forest. With proven reserves of around 170 billion barrels of oil, Canada ranks third in the world in oil reserves, behind only Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. For the past few decades, mining and processing this heavy oil has been a cornerstone of Canada's economy. Fort McMurray, once a tiny outpost, boomed into a bustling city as giant trucks the size of houses hauled bitumen-laden earth to extractors. The wealth from oil sands helped Canada become an energy giant, a major exporter of oil, particularly to the United States, and a source of jobs and economic growth nationwide. But with this boon came environmental challenges. The open-pit mines initially scarred large tracts of forest, tailings ponds grew where toxic wastewater was stored, and greenhouse gas emissions from extraction and upgrading soared. By the 21st century, as the world grew more conscious of climate change, the oil sands became a focal point of international scrutiny. Canada has found itself wrestling with how to balance economic interests with environmental stewardship. Efforts are underway to improve the footprint of oil sands operations. Companies now recycle the majority of their water, land reclamation projects are in progress to restore mined areas, and advances in situ extraction reduce the need for surface mining. Additionally, carbon pricing and investments in clean energy are part of Canada's strategy to eventually transition to a lower carbon economy. The conversation often echoes across Canada's other resource sectors too. In the great boreal forests that stretch from coast to coast, sustainable forestry practices are implemented to ensure that logging, for lumber and paper, doesn't irreparably damage ecosystems or threaten species like the woodland caribou. In the fisheries, after the collapse of Atlantic cod, stricter quotas and marine protected areas aim to prevent similar disasters for species like Pacific salmon. And in mining, there's increasing attention to tailings management and consultation with Indigenous communities who are stewards of the land, such as the landmark agreement that led to the protection of the Yukon's Peel watershed from mining development. The untold story behind Canada's resource wealth is thus one of learning and adaptation. The country has experienced the boom and bust of commodity cycles and witnessed environmental costs firsthand, giving it a perspective that pure abundance does not equate to endless bounty. As a result, Canadian society has been gradually shifting toward a model of resource development that includes the concepts of responsibility and reconciliation with nature and with the people most impacted. This means acknowledging, for example, that a mine or oil project must account for downstream impacts on Indigenous hunting grounds or water quality, and that sometimes certain spectacular places should simply be kept off limits for the sake of future generations. Globally, this Canadian journey mirrors the broader challenge of our time: how to sustain economic well-being while preserving the health of our planet. Canada's choices in managing its riches, from innovating in clean tech to setting aside vast conservation areas, could offer valuable lessons as the world grapples with sustainable development in the decades ahead. What ultimately does it mean to be Canadian? This question winds through all the facets we've explored: the land, the history, the peoples, and reveals a national identity continually being crafted. Stereotypes might suggest Canada is simply a colder, quieter version of its neighbor to the south, where everyone is polite, loves hockey, and says sorry a lot. And while it's true hockey is practically a second religion in some parts, come playoff season, whole cities indeed bond over the quest for the Stanley Cup. The essence of Canadian identity goes much deeper than maple syrup and Mounties. One could argue that the Canadian identity is defined by a constant negotiation between the many and the one. How to cherish the diversity of experiences and backgrounds within the country while still finding common ground. Unlike nations bound by a single language or long uninterrupted history, Canada's unity has always been a bit of a conscious construction. The motto on Canada's coat of arms reads, Amari Usque ad mare, from sea to sea, and since 2006 an updated version adds to sea at the end, acknowledging the Arctic Ocean as well. This motto highlights that the country spans a continent, yet it doesn't prescribe what the character of that country should be. So Canadians have, over time, defined it themselves through shared values and moments. For instance, Canada's role in international peacekeeping, a concept championed by Canadian Nobel laureate Lester B. Pearson, became a point of pride. The idea that Canada, with its relatively small military but strong moral compass, would serve as a mediator and helper in global conflicts. The sight of Canadian soldiers in their distinct blue berets on UN missions was long a symbol of Canada's approach to the world. Friendly, cooperative, and fair-minded. Domestically, values like healthcare for all, Canada's universal healthcare system is another pillar of identity. Public education and a social safety net are broadly supported across the political spectrum, reflecting a collective sense of looking out for each other. Another key piece of the Canadian identity puzzle is the relationship with nature. The term, "the true north, strong and free," from the national anthem, captures how deeply the idea of the North, vast, pure, challenging, resonates as part of Canada's self-image. Even those living in big cities often harbor a certain reverence for the country's wild spaces. Long weekends see highways packed with families, heading to cottages by lakes or campgrounds in the woods, a ritual of reconnecting with nature that is almost sacrosanct. In literature and art too, the Canadian wilderness looms large. The paintings of the Group of Seven, early 20th century artists, helped define Canadian art by glorifying windswept pines and brooding northern skies, while novelists like Margaret Atwood and Joseph Boyden weave the landscape as a character in their stories. These cultural expressions reinforce an identity tied to place. Not just any place, but this place, with its particular climate and geography. Importantly, the evolving Canadian identity increasingly strives to include the perspectives of those who were historically marginalized. This means recognizing that the Canadian dream was not equally accessible to all in the past. From Indigenous peoples subjected to policies of assimilation, to immigrant groups who face discrimination. Modern Canada's narrative includes frank conversations about these issues, such as nationwide truth and reconciliation efforts regarding residential schools that harmed Indigenous children. The willingness to confront these darker chapters is itself becoming part of Canada's identity as a compassionate, introspective nation seeking a more just future. Internationally, Canadians have often defined themselves by what they are not, frequently joking that their identity is simply not American. But that self-deprecation masks a quiet confidence that has emerged. Canadians know that their experiment, building a multilingual, pluralistic society that respects differences, is something special in the world. They take pride in their authors and musicians, from Leonard Cohen to Drake, their athletes, from sprinter Donovan Bailey's Olympic gold to Bianca Andreescu's tennis triumphs, and even their unique quirks, like the beloved coffee and donut chain Tim Hortons, which feels as Canadian as a winter toque. All these threads weave into an identity that is humble but proud, unassuming yet distinct. In the end, being Canadian might best be summed up as a shared promise to keep seeking balance between French and English, between Indigenous and settler, between individual and community, and between humanity and nature. It's an identity defined not by one voice but by a chorus of them, harmonizing as best they can. And much like the country's landscapes, it's an identity that offers endless room to explore and understand. The wonders of Canada, from its untamed frontiers to its cultural kaleidoscope, ultimately remind us that identity itself is a journey, one that Canadians invite the world to travel with them. If you enjoyed this journey through Canada's untold stories, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps more people discover this video through the algorithm.